Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and some of which to the intelligence committees. I actually had people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Sol Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. This is Smiles Lewis. Welcome to another live edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the live weekly news media roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, aka the Anomaly Archives, located here in Austin, Texas. Thank you for joining me. Like and subscribe, spread the love, donate if you can. You can find out more about us at our website, anomalyarchives.org, and we would love it if you would sign up for at least the free tier at our patreon.com/Anomaly Archives website. That is over there, over here, right there, over there. And if you subscribe at the $10 or more monthly level, the Anomaly Academy Cadet level, highlighted right there, you get access to our monthly lectures. Last week, we featured a good friend, Greg Bishop, presenting on Can Hard Data and Materialism Solve the UFO Enigma? A fascinating presentation by my friend Greg. Very much always interested in what he is looking into, and he's been at this a long time, and I've known him since the 1990s. Of course, coming up next month in November. Not quite November yet. All Hallows Eve tonight. Or is this the eve? Yes, right? Tomorrow's Halloween. Anyway, I guess the day of Halloween is All Hallows Eve. So, coming up next month, Joe Green presents a theoretical approach to conspiratorial thinking. That'll be Saturday, November 16th. Hope that you might consider joining us. Again, you can find out more about that by going to Patreon. Actually, I haven't posted about that yet, but I believe I have posted a stub, so to speak, over at anomalyarchives.org with background links to various information about Joe. Fascinating fellow, done a lot of hard work in the field of parapolitics and conspiracy research, and very much looking forward to his presentation. Of course, you can follow along with tonight's links by going to flipboard.com/anomalyarchives, and there are thousands and thousands of links there to articles that we've been archiving for the past many, many, many years. Of course, we do also post these links in a simpler text headline format over at the website, anomalyarchives.org, and you might want to check that out. Great bunch of stuff has come in just this past week. Of course, we pre-recorded last week's show in preparation so that we could attend the 7 o'clock presentation by Greg. But let's dive into this. Let's dive into this week's links here. So, big news, of course, folks interested in UFOs and UAP are going to want to know about the details of the upcoming November 13th Congressional UAP related hearing. This from Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena Scientific Research blog over at ufos-scientificresearch.blogspot.com. The latest U.S. Congressional UAP related hearing, 13th November 2024, is scheduled for that date. It will be a joint session of two of the subcommittees of the House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Accountability. The subcommittees involved are A, Cybersecurity, Information Technology, and Government Innovation, chaired by Nancy Mace, and B, National Security, the Border, and Foreign Affairs, chaired by Glenn Grothman. Thanks to U.S. researcher D. Dean Johnson for the information, which has a link there to his X/Twitter account, where I guess he's posted this information. There have been 3 previous UAP-related modern times hearings before subcommittees of the U.S. Congress, and the writer here, I'm guessing this is Keith Basterfield, has posted the links to the past committee hearings and little synopses of them. So if you aren't familiar with what's already been happening the last 2 years, these are great links to get started. And if that floats your boat, so to speak. Meanwhile, our good friends over at EFR, expandingfrontiersresearch.org, have posted a article that links to their recent interview with James Carrion. James Carrion was one of the very brief directors of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, one of the largest civilian UFO research organizations in the world. Its membership has ebbed and flowed over the years, but James Carrion is a fascinating character. If I'm remembering correctly, he's done military intelligence work, is fluent in Russian, I believe, and has worked in intelligence. And perhaps that's why he became so frustrated, because he could tell what was going on, that there was something secretive going on within MUFON. He kind of got, some say, scapegoated upon his sudden departure for some of the problems that MUFON was having at the time, but it seems evident from others' perspectives that, like I say, he was being scapegoated. But there's a great interview with him by Erica Lukes and Jack Brewer that you can find a link to from there. He also alludes to this presentation that he has also posted on his own website and on his YouTube channel. I have watched the interview with him. I have not watched his presentation yet, but he is somebody I have followed for some time because of his, I would say, conspiratorial, parapolitical perspective on this. And by that, he'd probably disagree. I think he kind of disparages conspiracy thinking in this and other interviews, but that's understandable given how easily people who are prone to conspiratorial thinking can go off the rails, go down false trails, etc. But I do think his intel background or his critical thinking really are worth exploring. And he's doing some interesting research involving utilizing AI, artificial intelligence, as a tool that is intriguing. And you can find that over at expandingfrontiersresearch.org. Of course, this morning I woke up and had a great UFO day. I woke up and started reading Tanner Boyle's latest article over at Getting Spooked, Part 7, Christopher Bledsoe and the UFO Cult of Intelligence, where he has been exploring it through all these different parts, the various interesting intel aspects of the Christopher Bledsoe UFO saga. This is one of those abduction, UFO, close encounter contact cases where I have not really been following it as closely as others have, and thankfully folks like Tanner Boyle and others have really been paying much closer attention, and for very good reasons. And it's, with this being part 7 of a very obviously long series of parts, it would be hard for me to dive too far into it, other than to say he really dissects, having read the book UFO of God, Chris Bledsoe's book that came out in 2023, he dissects all the weird connections to various government, military, intel, spooks, and thus the title of Tanner Boyle's blog, Getting Spooked. Tanner really explores, again, this parapolitical conspiratorial aspect of the UFO phenomena, the fact that there seems to be not just government cover-ups of UFOs and extraterrestrials or whatever, but more importantly, how the belief in these things is being manipulated by these agencies, these groups, and for reasons that likely have little to nothing to do with whether or not non-human intelligences are at the heart of the true UFO phenomenon. And I really recommend highly his work. It's so great to see another new young voice on the scene who's taking up the mantle of looking into these angles of the phenomena. And But one of the things that leads me to want to play some audio, which is a kind of a longish 4-minute clip, is his mentioning of this one focuses on John Alexander, who's a infamous character in the UFO scene, and who he and his wife really got caught up in online imbroglios back in the day, or relating to the issue of MILABs, military intelligence abductions, the abduction of UFO abductees, experiencers, and the idea that these kinds of experiences could be actually engineered as part of some experiments on the part of human agencies, not or simply re-abducting of people who have actually had contact with the quote-unquote true UFO phenomenon. But John Alexander is a very mysterious character, but there's a lot of great hyperlinks here to Tanner's past articles and other resources that are just fascinating. There's so much here that I want to delve into, but the one thing here, he quotes, I think this is from a Washington Post 2007 article, while Alexander scoffs at the notion that he is somehow part of an elaborate plot to control people's minds, he acknowledges support for learning how to tap into a potential enemy's brain. He gives as an example the possible use of functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, for lie detection. Brain mapping, quote unquote, with fMRI theoretically could allow interrogators to know when someone is lying by watching for activity in particular parts of the brain. Now, this may be an updated version of what little I know about fMRI, but what little I know about fMRI, I did want to bring up in this. Now, Tanner goes on to say brain mapping technologies such as those described in this excerpt would wind up appearing in Chris Bledsoe's case as well, not used for stamping out terrorism, but for verifying the experiences of a UFO contactee. Alexander has no qualms with mind control technology, behavior modification, or informational warfare. While paying lip service to the horrors of the MK-Ultra, the colonel was rather eager to bring it back into the fold with the advent of today's modern warfare. With Alexander's overarching belief in complete American military domination, is it any wonder that questions might exist about his motivations within the paranormal community? Should Chris Bledsoe be concerned about who he is letting give credence to his story, or show that individual or others like him may be shaping it? Now, again, I just wanted to briefly... and where did I put the clip? Oh, here we go. There's what I'm looking for. Okay. This is Whitley Strieber speaking at the Texas Book Festival in Austin, Texas in November of 2000. Boy, that was a pretty tumultuous time. Kind of like we're in now. He started this lecture, or at least a video I have of it, talking about having just published The Coming Global Superstorm that he wrote with Art Bell about sudden climate change. But this is about fMRI and trying to validate the experiences of abductees as kind of described similarly in Tanner Boyle's article. So here, let's hope this works.
But the point is, without the culture addressing this in a manner that it can in an organized way gain the information that's available and process it with the means that we have, and I refer to primarily to using scientific method to address it, and doing things like sequential studies of the psychological makeup of the people who have had the experience. The problem, for example, of whether or not these people are experiencing false memories can be resolved. It's resolvable with scientific techniques we possess now. For example, there have been some experiments on the human brain done with a device called the PET scanner, which enables a scientist to observe the brain as it functions to see which parts of the brain are functioning given depending upon what kind of stimulus the person who is in the PET scanner is being subjected to. It's been discovered that the brain functions differently when it is asked to recall something that was an actual physical event, as opposed to something that the individual involved only believed was physical. In other words, if a person is absolutely convinced that something really happened to them to the point that they can pass a lie detector test, as I certainly am in my case, it's now possible to tell whether or not that was an actual physical experience, because the brain will quite reliably demonstrate a different set of, it will call up the memory in a different way if it actually wasn't a real physical event taking place. In other words, the question could be resolved. So I have a small foundation, and we went to every institution in the country that possessed a PET scanner and the ability to address this problem. And not a single letter was even answered. And with that one little experiment, we could have gotten to a point where we could have said to probably something on the order of 1 million people just in this country who have had this close encounter experience, whether or not they were having something physical happen while it took place. It wouldn't necessarily say, therefore, that it must have been an alien encounter, but it would at least have taken us another step forward toward a useful paradigm that includes what happened to them, whatever its origin may be. It didn't happen. Now, however, another foundation that I'm in touch with is getting heavily involved with one of the people who is running one of these PET scanners, and hopefully it will happen this time. Hopefully we will get some time on the scanner for at least 10 or 20 subjects and see if we can't come to some kind of a useful answer. In the meantime, other fascinating things keep happening in our world that are misinterpreted by the media and are in an increasingly forced attempt to kind of shoehorn them back into the old paradigm of the way reality works, the old model of the universe.
I'm going to go ahead and stop there. It's about a 20 some odd minute clip, and I recorded that off of Access Television where it was played, and I was in the room when this was going on, and you could kind of hear some shouting in the background. Well, that was protesters outside the Capitol and around the governor's mansion, because this was November 2000. And yeah, you could constantly during this lecture hear protesters outside because of the Gore-Bush conundrum. Kind of vaguely reminiscent of where we are now, or maybe in next month. Anyway, as Getting Spooked talks about in that article by Tanner Boyle, fMRI, PET scan, can be used to basically scan a person's brain, and you can show them things, and if they recognize them, if they believe they have seen and experienced them before, certain parts of the brain light up in a way that can effectively be used as a lie detector, allegedly. This was what Strieber was talking about, and what I think it was this lecture that turned me on to this, and I started going down rabbit holes about this area of research. To my knowledge, there's been no follow-up, which is very sad, but c'est la vie. Okay, well, moving right along, let's go on to, all of Strieber's materials, or at least thousands of the communion letters, the letters written by readers of communion and his other books that wrote into him that were collated by his wife and Strieber. These all were donated, or a significant portion of the thousands of letters, I think over 3,000 letters, were donated to Rice University, Archives of the Impossible, created by Jeffrey Kripal, launched in 2022. But this article is a little misleading. Over at click2houston.com, Archives of the Impossible at Rice University marks 10 years exploring supernatural encounters and exponential growth. Well, they are certainly exponentially growing ever since they started taking on these collections of researchers like Ed May, Stanley Krippner, Whitley Strieber, Jacques Vallée. It's just been growing and growing and growing. And the 10 years that they're referring to is in this article, it says, Vallée, a French-born American astronomer, approached him back in 2014, him being Jeffrey Kripal, approached Kripal back in 2014 about finding a suitable university archive for his research. It took us about 4 years to negotiate that first gift, and multiple gifts have come in since 2018 or so, Vallée said. Now, of course, this all reminded me of the post that I did back in March of 2020, where I posted the flyer for the then burgeoning new opening event for the Archives of the Impossible that was scheduled for the end of 2020. Well, of course, the pandemic delayed that until 2022. But what it reminded me, of course, was how in Jacques Vallée's Forbidden Science Journals, Volume 4, on page 75, he wrote, in 2017, thanks to an invitation from a major U.S. university, I reorganized all my files into 3 major categories. ABC for analysis, background, and correspondence, and shipped an initial batch of 32 large boxes to be indexed by the librarians and used by graduate students. And I'm so glad that they have continued to flourish. This is such a great time for UFO archives and everything. So I'm optimistic that we can find a home again soon. Yes. Well, meanwhile, there's continuing coverage of the good news coming out of Rio Rancho, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Over at the debrief.org, National UFO Historical Records Center opens new facility showcasing largest UFO archive in North America. This article by Chrissy Newton. Chrissy, I'm very jealous. She got to go and visit the archive there, and these materials have now moved out of David Marler's beautifully outfitted garage and now have a semi-permanent home there at a Rio Rancho AISD or Independent School District temporary buildings. And so there is Chrissy with David Marler, and they are forging ahead. This is such great news. So glad and happy for them. In more UFO news, highly recommend this hour and 12-minute interview by Ross Coulthart and Robert Hastings. I think I mentioned before when I was reporting on Brian Cox's article about Robert Hastings. He's the guy who's really brought forth all the UFOs and nuclear facility, military nuclear connections. He has been researching and lecturing on that forever. In this lecture, he talks about the fact that he started lecturing in, I think, 1981. I must have seen him in the late 80s or probably early 1990s here in Austin when he spoke at the University of Texas. And I was just flabbergasted at the fact that a UFO researcher was being allowed to speak to students at the University of Texas. And it was a very down-to-earth, rational presentation that I was really impressed with. And as I mentioned in that previous episode, he shied away from talking about alien abductions and entity cases and contact cases, but has since come out about that and literally come out of the closet as a experiencer. He and his research associate have both had very strange experiences. And in fact, in this interview, among the many things that they cover, they also talk about the triple digit thingy, which I also talked about on that same episode where I was reporting on that Brian Cox article. And that the triple digit thingy is this phenomenon of experiencers, abductees waking up at 111, 222, 333, 444, 555. And I noted then the weird math of, well, that's 71 minutes apart cycle, and 71 is the number of Lamb, Aleister Crowley's alleged alien contact metaphysical entity. Anyway, I highly recommend. The literature says UAPs and nukes are connected over at Reality Check with Ross Coulthart. So I mentioned having woken up this morning and read Tanner Boyle's article from his Getting Spooked blog about John Alexander's connection to the Chris Bledsoe case. And then I binged the 3-episode series of Netflix's Manhattan Alien Abduction. that's all about what was also called the Brooklyn Bridge abduction case. That was supposed to be the best UFO abduction case ever. And I remember when this emerged, it was very exciting. It seemed to have just one crazy revelation after another. Thoroughly enjoyed this series that you can watch over at Netflix. I would highly recommend it. It is a testament to Carol Rainey. It's very interesting how this piece really sets it up at kind of as a pitting these two women against each other, Linda Napolitano, aka Linda Cortile, or the other way around, Linda Cortile, Linda Napolitano, I forget. Anyway, and Carol Rainey being Bud Hopkins' former wife, and she was a documentarian who was recording all of Bud's research. Oh, and there's a clip there. So this is so much. I really enjoyed this. It's got a real retro feel. They designed the set dressings and the overall feel to make it feel like the 80s, the late 80s, and the music choice is rather interesting in and of itself. The first episode starts with some music, the classic Your Own Personal Jesus song, which turns out to be their reference to Bud Hopkins. And of course, Carol Rainey wrote about how she felt like Bud was deceived, but that he also ended up being part of the deception and basically just wasn't a very good investigator, despite what others said. But in that clip, there was a tiny little snippet also of somebody I was really surprised to see. They mentioned that when the paranoia ramped up really high, a gentleman that was a friend of Bud Hopkins had gear designed to detect bugs, surveillance equipment, and they show him, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Andy Abercrombie, who was, I believe he lived in Houston or San Antonio, but I think it was Houston, and he would come down to Austin MUFON events, and that's how I knew him. He was very active in the UFO community, a very wonderful, nice guy. Anyway, I just was going down memory lane in that sense and found some old references to Andy. I just was not expecting to see him in this documentary. But as I said in previous episodes talking about this before it came out, you can go to anomalyarchives.org, and we have a page for Carol Rainey with links to her website, carolrainey.com, as well as some of the important past materials. Her Paratopia Volume 1, Number 1, it was actually only ever one magazine issue. Her article on co-creation of the alien abduction phenomena, and her open letter to the UFO community, and so much more. It's a very well-produced series. It's only 3 episodes. They're not that long. Highly recommend it. There's so much more I might want to say about this, but I'll just let you go take a look and see what you think about it. But it also features UFO researcher Peter Robbins, who is just a very nice, wonderful fellow, and I don't think he certainly felt he's very much more aligned with Bud Hopkins and feels, as many people did and do, that Carol Rainey was just a angry, bitter ex-wife, and that she's tearing down the memory and the legacy of her ex-husband, who is since passed, of course, Bud Hopkins. But I don't think that's really the case. I think what she's trying to do is set the record straight, or at least give a counterbalance to the believers in that case and in Bud Hopkins' work. There was a lot of other weird stuff about the case, the Brooklyn case, and that was that the plot, several people thought there were connections to a novel that had come out right before this story started emerging called Night Eyes. And I've read that book around that time. It certainly definitely had elements. I don't know that it's necessarily exactly relevant, but this is an article from Sunlight, a very skeptical online publication from astronomyufo.com. I think this is the 2016 issue, Linda Cortiel and Night Eyes, Considerations on a Rebuttal by Luis Gonzalez. Also over at the kufos.org website, the online archive for the March-April 1993 issue of the International UFO Reporter, IUR, has articles about this case, the Linda case, hoax or breakthrough. So just to remind folks who may not be familiar with what this case entails, basically it's the story of a woman in New York City who starts having abduction experiences and is floated out a window through the walls, something of her like 8-story, 14-story, whatever, out of the upper levels of her apartment complex and up into the belly of a hovering UFO, and that this was allegedly witnessed by 23 different individuals who were investigated by Bud Hopkins, and just everything from then on up just escalates and escalates and escalates in terms of, wow, this is going to be the case of the century. You know, that many witnesses to an abduction, and how many abductions have been witnessed where people see somebody being floated up into a craft in the middle of Manhattan. Oh, and then there's a nasal implant corroborated through an X-ray, and there's espionage intrigue when some security people start harassing the main experiencer abductee because they were some of the witnesses. And who were they security for? Javier Perez de Cuellar of the United Nations, allegedly, who also witnessed this. And it just ramps up, and then she's abducted by them, and she threatens to shoot them, and there's a love story, and it's on and on and on. And I saw her speak, I believe in like 92, or maybe it was 94 or 5, I forget exactly, early to mid 1990s at the Albuquerque, New Mexico MUFON Symposium. And I'll never forget arch debunker Philip Klass in fanboy photographer mode up there taking pictures of her. Anyway, check it out, Netflix documentary. Okay, so last few things here, if I can quickly go. Oh, wait. Let's see. Where did I leave off? Okay. So this is a weird one. Don't these people know? So, you know, the Getting Spooked article, Tanner Boyle's articles about Chris Bledsoe's The Cult of Intelligence, called The Cult of Chris Bledsoe, is a reference to the Cult of Intelligence by Victor Marchetti and John Marks. I think those are the authors. And this idea that there just seems to be these cults of intelligence, of military and government intelligence types who often surround the UFO phenomena, and who definitely are surrounding Chris Bledsoe's experiences. And it's almost as if he's being primed to be a prophet on some new UFO religion. And of course, Diana Pasulka and Jeff Kripal, as religious studies scholars, Diana Pasulka is one who very early on came into contact with Chris Bledsoe and was connecting him with people. And she, of course, has been long into researching the Catholic Church, and in her previous work, researching purgatory. And so there does tend to be this sense of like the Vatican trying, as always, to keep pace with people's beliefs and maybe adapting to these new realities. But then there's things like this crazy story. The Vatican just dropped an anime girl mascot named Lucy. This immediately is evocative of Lucifer, the light bearer. And while I'm no person to advocate for the literal interpretations of good and evil as personified in the Bible and other works, this seems very strange to me. And even in this article over at TokyoWeekender.com is a picture of, let's see, the Vatican unveils its anime mascot, Luce, In preparation for the 2025 Holy Year and the Osaka World Expo, the Vatican has partnered with Tokidoki artists to create an anime-inspired mascot. This just seems very, very strange to me. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of quote-unquote Illuminati interpreter conspiracy people who are going to go nuts about this. So just a heads up. Well, I wanted to give some positive news. Somebody who I went to high school with here in Austin, Texas, Chris Searles, has created and been working on a ecologically oriented project that you can find out more information about at his website, biointegrity.net. And he's been doing an amazing project that's basically trying to create rain, trying to, instead of seeding clouds, like that type of weather modification that has become so controversial, and that really has always been controversial, he put out this comprehensive list of YouTube and Vimeo playlists where he's collected all the videos he's produced about this research project, rainmaking with trees, and goes into detail about the different projects that he's been doing for the last 2 to 3 or more years. And so I'll provide the link to this. And of course, like I say, biointegrity.net is his website. But yes, on the YouTube channel, you can find links to these videos, and this one that's a 10, 11-minute intro to his work gives a really good overview of it to get started. But it basically amounts to watering trees, the biggest trees in certain areas. I think it's upwind from the rest of the forest. Anyway, he goes into all the details, and he's been calculating the data, and it really, unless his information is completely wrong, he may be on to a very simple way to help improve our environment and save our ecosystems. And I just think this is a very beautiful idea based on seemingly very natural, basic principles that anybody can understand. Gives references and links to the scientific papers that inspired him and that back up his sense that this is really rational, science-based reality. So check it out. I really am proud to know that somebody from our graduating class is doing such a great thing. And yeah, he's been doing all these different projects, bringing the rain to droughted areas, and also trying to improve and reduce or eliminate forest fires. Now, obviously, forest fires have a natural place in ecological processes, but I think we all understand that a lot of them are happening more than they need to. But that's for the scientists and the ecologists to determine. Meanwhile, I'll end on, last week, I think it was, I was commenting on the DoFi12.com's 2016 onward collection of urban legends of Austin. And one of them, of course, I went on about that involves the Frost Bank in downtown Austin and people thinking it looks like an owl. And I joked that, I've also heard that it looks like nose hair trimmers. And sure enough, in the course of this interview with the author of what's the book called, Lost Austin, which I think I may have also mentioned before, but basically they at some point they start talking about that same building, and they bring up the same thing. They don't bring up any of the conspiracy stuff or the Rice University angle or the Alex Jones information, but they make reference to the idea of it looking like nose hair trimmer. So I was like, what? That's so crazy. Okay, that's going to be it for tonight, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate your help, everybody. Thank you for listening. Like, subscribe, all that stuff. Event happening at Nature's Treasures, their new location. Come on down. First ever Unhalloween, produced by Saul Ravencraft. And we're going to be tabling there, and we're going to be interviewed by Saul. And you should check it out. You can find out more at, we'll provide the link Or you can just search for first ever un-Halloween celebration event, Nature's Treasures, that kind of thing. And that's going to be a lot of fun. Really looking forward to that. And also, of course, as previously mentioned, we've got coming up next month, Joe Green presents a theoretical approach to conspiratorial thinking, Saturday, November 16th, 2024. All right, that's it. Really, this is for real. It's the end. This is the end.